Today we're talking about my top 5 desert island. If I couldn't mix a vocal with anything else, these would be the plugins I would use. We're going to need plugins in a few different categories. We'll need to cover EQ, dynamics like compression, and effects like reverb and delay. So starting with EQ, there's 2 types we're going to need, a parametric EQ and an analog style EQ. The parametric is going to let us be really detailed and picky and really get in there and make specific boosts or cuts. I use this a lot for notching out harshness in things like guitars, or the upper mid-range in a vocal, or use it as a filter to clean up low end and create effects. My parametric EQ of choice is the FabFilter Pro Q3. It's so user-friendly and goes above and beyond what a normal EQ can do. It can even function as a dynamic EQ so that you can have it react when a frequency gets too loud and not be constantly attenuating. This lets you get in there and be real sneaky and undetected because it's not changing the sound the entire time, only when those areas need to be brought down. Moving on to a more analog style EQ, I love the Waves API 550B. It's got 2 mid-range bands and a high and low shelf that can both be switched from a shelf to a bell, so lots of flexibility. The purpose of this style EQ is not to have to make too many decisions and to work within the limitations of this tool. I'll reach for this kind of EQ for more general tone shaping, so for example, if I need to brighten up the vocal, but not if I need to reduce a resonant frequency at say 3.6K. I tend to use an analog style EQ like this for boosting because the curves are so gradual that it sounds nice and natural. Then, if I need to reduce a few areas in smaller notches, I can reach for the FabFilter Pro Q3. When it comes to compression, you can't go wrong with the Waves CLA 76. I mean, the hardware 1176 is the vocal compressor, and this emulation can get us some really great sounds and nice, even vocals that cut through a mix. I tend to layer compression, so a fast attack, fast release to grab the transients going into a slower attack, still fast release for more general leveling. With the CLA 76, you can accomplish this by putting 2 of them in a row. Set the first one with the attack and the release nice and fast, and the second with the attack all the way slow. Set your gain reduction on the first compressor to just be grabbing some of the louder sections and controlling those. Now, the second compressor is seeing a much more even signal and won't jump around as much, and so we can leave the attack a bit slower. A Deesser is a dynamic plugin that focuses on the high frequencies, and we can use it to control the S's and harsh sibilant sounds. It's a really useful tool when we want to make a vocal nice and bright, but we don't want the S's to pop out too much and hurt your listeners' ears. I really like the Waves Deesser, and this is starting to sound like a commercial for Waves, but they make great tools and they've been around for a long time. So for a lot of us, they're the tools that we learned on. There are fancier Deessers out there, but I like that this one is simple, easy to use, and it gets the job done. It's one slider. You set the frequency range you want to attenuate and just pull the slider down until it sounds how you want. I like to de-ess in a few stages, so if a singer has really loud, harsh S's, I'll put it first in the chain, even before compression, and that way the S's aren't what's triggering the compressor. It's seeing a much more even signal. Then later, as we start to brighten up the vocal with things like EQ, the S's might start to jump out again and need to be controlled. So where you place this in your chain is going to depend on your vocalist, but don't be afraid to experiment. So let's see, we've got a parametric EQ, an analog EQ, a compressor, and a Deesser. So that's 4, and that brings us to the last plugin in our top 5 list. The last category is the effects category, and I went back and forth deciding if this should be a reverb or a delay, and I decided to land on a reverb, and here's why. Reverbs are hard, if not impossible, to emulate manually. Delays, on the other hand, can be easily created by just dragging a copy of the track that you want to delay and moving it later in time by exactly the amount you want it delayed by. You can then use an EQ or compressor to really get creative with the delay track and make some cool new effects. Also, most DAWs come with a stock delay, and that will work just fine. So reverb it is. The Valhalla Vintage Verb is one that I could not live without, and I know that's extreme, but it's so great. It's one of those plugins you just open up and the default setting just makes everything sound so good, but it's also extremely customizable. Out of the gate is a really smooth, long 4-second reverb that adds so much dimension to a sound, but you can quickly dial that back and put your singer in a tiny cold room if that's the sound you're after. It's got built-in filters and modulation as well as attack time and pre-delay. The ease of use and how quickly I can go from having a boring, dry vocal to the spacious sound that I was hearing in my head is what lands this plugin on our list and my reverb of choice. Now, this video is not sponsored by any of the brands we talked about today. They are the tools I use every day to mix my vocals, but to be honest, the plugins themselves are not the important part. the categories are. Having any parametric EQ that you're comfortable with and can quickly move around in is going to work just fine, even if that is the stock EQ that comes with your DAW. If you don't have any analog style EQs, you can always use a parametric EQ to make general gradual movements, but just shoot for a bandwidth of 1 or lower. Most DAWs come with great compressors as well, and if you have to set your attack and release settings by the millisecond, 5 to 10 milliseconds is what I'd consider a fast setting for both of those, and 30 to 40, maybe a little more like 50 milliseconds is probably what I would use for the slower attack time. We talked about manually creating delays and how it's a bit harder to make a reverb from scratch, so you might be stuck with what's included in your DAW or buying something if you're going for a new sound. But don't let budget hold you back. Use what you've got and use your ears and get creative. You can also combine some of the tools that we talked about today. So if you don't love the way that the stock Pro Tools reverb sounds, it's not my favorite on its own, and it doesn't really have too much control when it comes to shaping the EQ, but that doesn't mean you can't put an EQ before or after it and do some tone shaping yourself. So thank you for hanging out today, and if you found this video helpful, consider subscribing. I like making videos, and there's a bunch of other ones on the channel, and there's going to be more in the future, so I hope to see you there.